Today is February 27th, 2015, and I am here in Ventura, California today speaking to Max M. Vanderwick. Max is 95 years young, and his birthday is November 20th, 1919. Max served our country in the United States Navy from around April 4th, 1941, for the next 16 years till about 1957. He served both during the World War II and the Korean War. Max achieved the rank of Chief Petty Officer when he was discharged. My name is Barbara Kula, and I am here today on behalf of the Canale Valley National Society Daughters of the American Revolution for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Ed Lynch from Advantage Videography will be filming the interview today. Also present are Max's 4 children, Karen, Linda, Richard, and Mark, and Bob Perry, he's a volunteer from the DAR. Tell me where you were born.
I was born in Los Angeles, 2 blocks from Wilshire and Western, way out in the boondocks in those days.
Not much traffic.
No.
And who did you live with there? Did you
My parents.
Any brothers and sisters?
No. Well, I had 3 younger brothers.
What did your dad do for work?
Oh. Well, he was always in business for himself. He was an excellent salesman. And when he first came to this country, of course, he did anything that needed to be done. He didn't have any particular talents or experience, so it was quite difficult for him. And we used to get a kick out of listening to some of the stories about different jobs that he took, figuring that they'd at least give him a day to get adjusted, and he'd watch what other people were doing and try to work it out. And like one time he even took a job as a stage manager and in a theater back east. And of course he had no experience at all with the theater in those days.
What country did he come from?
Germany.
And when did
he was
come?
born in Berlin.
And when did he come to the United States?
In 1910. He was 22.
Wow. So what kinds of things did your dad sell?
During the beginning of his adult period, he was selling for towel and linen supply companies. You see, in those days, there wasn't any such thing as paper towels or rolls or anything like that. And doctors and dentists and of course restaurants and so forth, they all needed linens of one kind or another. And so that's what he was selling way back then. And he was very good. He used to take me around with him when I was little.
And what did you see? What did you see?
He had this at the time. He had this little Whippet automobile, which was a small car in those days. And he'd let me come with him, and of course I enjoyed that.
And you were the oldest?
Yeah.
Now, how long did you live in Los Angeles?
Well, actually, we moved to Pasadena, and that's where I pretty much grew up. I went through, the whole school system there.
I was thinking as we were talking the other day that perhaps you moved to another part of the country for a while. Did you move to the Midwest?
Yes.
And how old were
I
you?
started school in Chicago.
Okay. What was that like?
Well, it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of friends in the neighborhood, and we lived right across from the school grounds. So there was all kinds of things for us to do, besides building our little automobiles and so forth, like we used to do in those days.
And what did your dad do for work in Chicago?
For what?
Work. What kind of work did
Oh,
he
that
do?
he was doing. That's when he was a salesman for the towel and linen supply business,
Okay.
which, by the way, was in competition with the famous big gangster in those days, Al Capone.
Really?
Al Capone had, for his legitimate business, he had bought up several companies in that business that they called the Big Six at that time. And he would go to a customer, and the customer would say, "You better go to the other side of town or over to Evanston or someplace. There was a gang full of thugs looking for you here just a little while ago." And of course, my mother was getting these phone calls about finding his body in the river the next day and all that kind of stuff.
Goodness.
So it was a pretty exciting time. He didn't mind it. He was making a lot of money, and like I say, it was exciting to him. But it finally came to a point where all friends and family and so forth convinced them that they should move someplace else. And that's when they flipped a coin and decided either to go to Germany so my mother could meet my dad's family, or to come back to Los Angeles.
And what
And
happened?
fortunately, that lucky coin came out Los Angeles.
Your family must have been very relieved. Because when was that? Was that in the was that in the 40s?
So they bought a brand new Studebaker and headed for L.A.
Uh-huh.
That's the second time they went across the country in an automobile.
Wow. So you ended up in, was it Pasadena?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you went to school in Pasadena.
What?
You went to school in Pasadena.
Yes, I did. Yes.
And your family had a business, I understand.
Right.
And
right.
did you help with that?
Yeah.
What did you do?
Well, a lot of different things. One of the things we were making, the company was called Horty Van Manufacturing Company. What we were making was banners made out of felt for service clubs and things like that, and
Schools.
and also school pennants with the name of the school written, lettering on the pennant.
Mm-hmm.
And And then my mother came up with an idea one day, and I don't know, we may have been coming to, every weekend we went to some vacation place, which was pretty exciting for us kids. And I think we were coming to Long Beach, and so my mother got this idea and went to a store and bought some postcards, and then she had cut out of some cardboard so that there was a square the size of a photograph in those days, and she would put it on these pictures of that particular place we were visiting, and find some scenery that looked interesting, and cut that part of the picture out of the postcard, and then sew it onto a felt pennant that was shaped like a pennant, but it was 16 inches long, and at the wide end it was 5 inches. And she would sew that picture on up in that corner on a power sewing machine. And then my dad would, who knew how to, one of the things he learned how to do when he was looking for jobs back east, when he came over here, was how to operate a embroidery machine. It will sew, make a stitch going in the direction that you pointed, and you can actually write with it. And he would write Long Beach, California on it, on the pennant. And then my dad would sell them to souvenir stores and curio shops and places like that at the resort where we were visiting.
It sounds like you know a lot about the machine.
Yeah.
Did you operate it?
Yeah, I could operate a Singer Power machine when I was 8 years old, and I learned to do everything that was required by the business they were doing. I would make patterns which amounted to taking some brown wrapping paper, laying it out at a work table, and drawing whatever I wanted to produce, like all the lettering of, say, if that was Long Beach, and then we had a perforating needle, which at one end has a large group of pointed steel, like needles, and you could roll it around on paper, and so what I would do was when I drew out what I wanted, I would take that, and so that I could lay that paper pattern on top of some felt or whatever material I was using at the time, and put some talcum powder on top of the paper, and then I'd make a little bundle like a dauber, and work that powder through the perforated section of that pattern. And that would, on the felt or whatever it was it would leave the lettering or picture or whatever that I had done with the perforating thing, and that's what my mother would place the picture accordingly on the pennant to sew it on, and my dad would follow the lettering that had come through on the on the felt.
Right.
And
Well, it certainly was a family business.
well, it was strictly.
Yes.
And of course, on the back of these would be a lot of threads, like you have from any sewing operation, because the needle goes down, and it usually only takes one thread with it and brings it back up, which makes that stitch. So there's always some little strings left of threads, and they had to be snipped off with a pair of scissors. So I would do that, and then also up at the big end of that pennant, we had a little die that I could put over where I wanted to make a hole in the felt, and put the top part of that die on and hit it with a hammer, and I could take maybe a stack like that of material, and that would have put a hole in each one of the pennants in that particular location. And then I would take some scrap felt that was laying on the floor and cut some strips and make a bow with that, put it through the hole and make a bow, and that was just a finishing touch for that souvenir pennant.
Well, we have some beautiful pictures that we're going to
What?
we have some beautiful pictures of some flags
Yeah.
as well that your family business made.
And so my dad would sell those for, at the time, I think it was $12 a dozen or something like that.
Amazing.
And so we would go home with enough money to buy food for the next week. And
you all helped. So you went to school.
Yeah.
You went how far in school in Pasadena? What grade did you complete?
Well, of course, I went through grammar school and junior high school and Pasadena High School
Oh, when did you graduate?
in 1937.
Okay. And then what did you do?
I stayed in business with my folks, and we added some other types of things to do. And the name of the company was, like I said, was Horty Van Manufacturing Company.
You want to hold that picture up, Max, so we can see it? It's a picture of your company's name and the truck.
Yeah.
Would you hold that over here, and I'll hold the other part?
Oh, okay.
How did you get the name Horty Van?
Well, my mother's name was Hortense, and everybody called my dad Van because of our last name.
Well, that made sense.
And when they first started in business after the war, they wanted to try importing and exporting because of their connections in Europe, and so they used the name Horty van for their cable address. And that's where that came from.
I see.
And of course, everybody called my mother Horty.
Right.
And
That's amazing. So after high school, you helped your family with the business. Did you go on to any other schooling? Did you go to school after high school?
yeah, I did. I wanted to get some college, and my folks wanted me to, of course. So first I finished up high school at Pasadena City College, and then I decided I wanted to go someplace else, and I checked around and finally decided to go to Los Angeles City College. And I was looking through their books to see what they offered, and I came on the drama department, and I had always been interested in the theater, and I'd been in some plays in school and community, and so I decided to major in drama there at LA City College, and that's what I ended up doing.
And,
And,
what'd you do with the drama?
But when it got to be in 1936, by that time I was so involved in the business, and it was taking so much time that it was difficult for me to keep my grades up. And I decided one day, to heck with that noise, and I quit school then. That was in 1937. And that June I graduated from Pasadena City College.
Okay.
And went on through LA City College.
Okay.
And so that was my school experience.
And so you were able to work in the family business, and were you able to be in plays?
Yeah, I did. It was practically a day and night thing with me, because I had added a different phase to the business. The pennants and those kind of things didn't interest me that much. They weren't exciting or anything. And I liked the idea of climbing up on buildings and high places and so forth. And so we added the flag and decorating business to the scope of our whole operation. And so, for example, in 1932, in Los Angeles, we had the American Legion convention here, and the Olympic Games, and let's see what else. There was something else too.
The Rose Parade.
I'm hearing from the background, the Rose Parade.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's a big one.
We always had that every year. And my dad had connections through the Chamber of Commerce with the Tournament of Roses Association. And so from the very beginning, they used to have us make the banners that they carry in the parade, you know,
Yes.
in front of the floats and
Yes.
so forth.
Very important.
And besides that, the stores would all let us put up flags and decorations on the storefronts, and so I would make what we called the centerpieces, was a 4x6 flag with a picture of something on it, and then on each side of that, I would hang a fan-shaped flag that I would ruffle up and put right next to that centerpiece, one on each side, and it made a nice center of decoration that I could arrange on the building front to make it attractive, and we would rent that to the different businesses for maybe $10 a month or whatever, and so it took ladders to get up on the fronts of the building, or even on the rooftops where I would hang things over the parapet on the front,
Right. Did you venture out on your own into construction? Did you go into construction?
Well, that happened. I had, when the business wasn't making enough money, I got other kinds of jobs, and I would, if there weren't any, I would make them. For example, I became very good at working on automobiles and trucks and things like that as a mechanic. So I might be walking in the morning down a street and see a whole row of cars parked on the side of a driveway or an empty lot, and nothing going on. And every now and then somebody would come out, open up the hood and put their head underneath. So I would go over there maybe around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and talk to the owner, and I would tell him, I see you have a lot of work here and nobody's doing it, and I'm sure that I could help you get through this if you wanted to hire me as a mechanic. And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll work for you for 10 days or 2 weeks, and if at the end of that time you don't think I can make you money, you won't owe me anything. And so I got jobs like that, not only with being an auto mechanic, but other things too. I'd see a way that somebody needed some help doing something, and I always figured if I have a little time to see what's going on and how these things are being done, I can figure out how to do it myself. And so I got a lot of jobs that way, like I say, making them myself.
We're working up to the time where you joined the Navy.
Oh, yeah.
What made you decide to join the Navy?
Well, I had a close friend I went to high school with, Ronnie Newman, and we used to have lunch together every day. We each had a hot rod in those days, and we'd park someplace, like at a gas station where we knew the people, or a drive-in restaurant, or even an empty lot sometimes. And we'd discuss what was going on in the world and tell each other what we were doing and so forth. And sometimes we'd even work for the other parent. And that was the only time we got paid, either one of us. When I worked for his folks, they paid me, and when he worked for mine, they paid him.
That's a good deal you had going.
Yeah.
So he was your buddy, and
So,
so what made you decide to join the Navy?
oh, that's right. Well, Ronnie and I could see by what was going on in the world that there was going to come a time when there would be another war. And of course, we had grown up with World War I. You know, that was the subject of conversation all around the world at that time. And we could see that there was something was going to happen. And we decided between us, if there was another war, that we would join the service, and picked out the Navy. And so when Pearl Harbor happened, that Monday, we came down to Los Angeles to the recruiting station, and we both signed up for the next 12 years in the Navy.
Wow. So where did you go after you signed up? You had to wait to be activated.
Came here to San Diego for boot camp, and he went, I think, to Great Lakes. I think that's where they sent him, to the boot camp there.
When you were in boot camp, Max, what were you thinking you would like to do in the Navy? What kind of work?
Well, I had been very attached to the ocean growing up, and when my mother would drive us around to some of those vacation spots where my dad would get out and solicit the souvenir pennants, we would be parked like down at the beach here, where I could watch the guys from the ships getting on the small boats and coming over to the shore to go on liberty. And I saw what they were doing, and like I say, I was always interested in the ocean, and had become a pretty good sailor. I even worked on sailing ships. Like I worked for this, trying to think of this movie actor's name.
Errol Flynn.
Yeah, Errol Flynn. That's right. I worked for him on his ship for 3 summers. And so the Navy was a natural.
Right, and you had so many skills before you went in.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering, the big question is, you went to college, but I understand that you enlisted. You decided to enlist instead of getting a commission.
Yeah.
What made you decide to do that?
Decide to enlist?
Yeah,
Well, because of what was going on in the world.
but you didn't want to be an officer.
No, I thought about it, but in I used to have all these original ideas in my own mind, and I thought to myself, no matter what I do, I want to try to be good at it, and I would expect that if I served in the enlisted as an enlisted man first, that I would make a better officer. And that was that reason
Okay.
that I decided to enlist. And my friend Ronnie felt the same way.
Now, after you left San Diego, where did you go?
Well, they transferred me to the 1st Naval District, which is in New England. And so I went to Boston.
And what did they have you do? What was your title?
Well, I was working in the shipyard for a while, and I was actually, my rate was a carpenter. And of course, there isn't a lot of carpenter work anymore in the Navy. But they always found things for me to do. Like my first duty right at this station here was in transportation. And I was driving all the big trucks, which I knew how to do. Before I went to Boston, when I was still out here, my friend Ronnie, his dad was a contractor. And so when I worked for him, I learned a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got a job with different companies in Southern California here. Like I worked for this one lumber yard where I knew the people because one of my best friends was his father who owned the business, and he had gotten a contract to make the windows and doors and frames for all of the what they call defense housing that they built right in the beginning of World War II. And so I worked with them for almost a year.
So you had construction skills before you got to Boston.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I did.
I also remember you mentioning that you used to do some alterations in the shipyard too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did.
So you are what they call a jack of many trades.
And
And I understand there was a very...
I worked on Santa Anita racetrack.
Okay.
That was one of my first carpenter jobs.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it was. I was able to join the union, which was a big thing in those days.
All right, so while you were in Boston, I understand that you met a very lovely lady.
What?
You met a very lovely lady in Boston. May Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
So you were stationed in the shipyard and you met her.
Yeah. And also at what we called the Fargo building, which was a combination of two buildings in South Boston that was strictly business related. All kinds of companies had their main offices there because Boston was one of those places around the country that attracted all kinds of businesses.
Right.
You know, because that's where things were happening. In Boston and New York and Los Angeles.
How long were you in Boston, Max?
That time I was there for 4 years.
And at that time, did you get married while you were in Boston?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's where Mary Kelly comes in.
I see. So during the time you were in Boston, you got some orders to go someplace.
Oh, yeah.
Where was that?
Well, the biggest part of that adventure was going to Greenland, where I spent a solid 2 years. I think I spent 4 winters there.
And you left your wife back in Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was her family there?
Yeah, her family was there. And actually, when I was there, we lived with them.
Oh, I see.
They had a house and in Jamaica Plain, and we shared a room with 2 of her brothers and 1 sister.
One big happy family.
So, but the Kellys were wonderful people, and and they learned to love me, and I them, and so those were good times.
And then you had to go to Greenland.
Yeah.
So what was the focus of the job you had there?
In Greenland?
Yes.
Well, I did everything. I built some buildings, and I built a dock, and did a lot of electrical and plumbing work and that sort of thing, and the maintenance on the little Quonset hut type buildings that we had there. We had 6 of them. One was for our CO, our commanding officer, for his office, and he lived there too. And another was for the mess hall and kitchen, and then my buddy Henry McLaughlin, who lived in Boston all his life, we built a building to put our radio transmitter, which was the whole purpose of our station, in there, and a couple of other buildings.
I understand that this was a top secret location.
Yes, it was. In fact, my whole family back here were all investigated and went through the whole CIA and all that stuff, you know.
You had so many skills. You had construction, electric, plumbing, automotive,
Yeah.
whatever. But you also had another skill, and that was speaking German.
Oh, yeah,
And that was very, very advantageous
Yes,
to the
it was.
military.
it came in very handy.
How did you help them with that?
How did I what?
Help them with the German language?
Oh, we had, for example, where I was stationed there, radio men who constantly had their earphones on and were listening to radio transmissions going on all around the world that the FBI and all our Secret Service people were following. And so every now and then things would come up that they couldn't understand. You see, it's a difficult thing, not only for German but other languages too. When you get into technical things, they're hard to understand, and that was a problem that they were having. And so when they had something in writing, you know, that these radio men had taken down, they were on their typewriter all the time with the earphones on. Why, they would call me in to the federal building downtown and ask me to give them the best translation I could. And so that's how I was able to utilize speaking German.
Okay.
And of course it was strange too. One of the places I was stationed at there in Boston was also a receiving station for the German prisoners. And so any of my buddies in the Navy in the various departments who needed help doing what their job was, they would call the main office and say, we need 20 men. And so an officer would then pick out 20 guys, and that's out of the German prisoners, and send them with a corporal to wherever it was their help was needed. And so they would call me to help communicate with those German prisoners.
That was very valuable.
And so I had a lot of interesting things to do.
I know. I want to hear about the conditions living in Greenland. What was that like, Max?
Well, if you can imagine opening up a door here and looking out and seeing nothing but this vast area of nothing but white snow, that's what it was. And underneath that snow was frozen ice. So anything we built didn't have much foundation because we couldn't get down to the rock. So we had these, I don't know if you're familiar with Quonset huts,
Yes.
but they were designed and built during the war, and were used originally for our training bases and so forth for the buildings. And so like I say, we had 6 of those, and they had to be maintained, and also we would build something inside so we could use them for offices or storage places for tools and so forth.
How many people were out there on that base?
When I first got there, there were 20 of us, and also there were about 15 Army guys who were supposed to be our protection in case the Germans were trying to get on our island and capture us or whatever. And so we all lived in those modified Quonset huts. And the routine that we had, my friend Henry and I, we'd get up early in the morning, and the first thing we would do was take a couple of blowtorches and put them on top of what we used for heating the buildings was a 50-gallon drum that we'd pour a little oil in the bottom of and light it. And that would give us enough heat to be fairly comfortable overnight. We'd put on 2 of them. We'd put it one each of a blowtorch, if you know what that is, and heat that up so we could light it, because you couldn't get anything to burn because of the weather conditions.
And that was dangerous what you did.
Yeah, and when those were warm enough, then we'd go outside. We had a little pond at the lowest point on that little island, and that's where we got our water from. But everything, of course, drained into that, so it was pretty polluted, and had all kinds of different colored bugs jumping around in that water.
Wow.
In fact, an Army colonel came to visit his men that he had stationed there one time, and when he looked around and saw the situation, he said, "This is no place for the United States Army," and that's when he took them off. And of course they took with them a lot of the things that we needed, but they did leave us a couple of machine guns, and of course we each had our own rifle, and whatever food and other kinds of things that they could spare.
So how many of you were left at that point when the Army left? How many Navy men were there?
We got down to 12.
And I'm understanding that you were in a top secret place that was so secret they lost track of you. Is that right? They lost track of you being out there.
Yeah.
Were you able to contact anyone to ask for help?
The only people we could contact was like some of the Army guys who were still stationed at weather stations or little outposts like that, and the main base, which was on Greenland. Thule was its name, Thule.
So what did you have to eat?
Well, in the 20s And part of the 30s when Amelia Earhart and Lindbergh and all the other explorers were making their trips, part of their job was to locate areas that could be utilized at some time as Army or Navy bases, you know, and they would take photographs, and then the services would, at some point, station some people at these areas. And of course, when they did that, they had to make arrangements to feed them, and so there was a little bit of canned food and things like that left over from those days. So we had that, and then at the main base that I was telling you about, whenever we were able to go over there, we would come back with some food. They would let us take whatever we could find that they didn't need. Most of the food that we got from there didn't arrive there until 1920s. So it was all pretty old.
Pretty old, yeah.
And stale, but that was all right. Anything was better than nothing.
I understand that you wrote a weekly newspaper.
Yeah, I put out a little paper I called the Alcatraz Gazette, and and I'd leave it on the tables where we had our dinner on Sunday, and the guys would pick them up and read them.
Well, you had to make something good out of a bad situation.
Yeah.
Now,
And-
were there any natives living out there, local people?
Pardon me?
Were there local people?
Well, there were some natives. We called them Skimos instead of Eskimos, and they were a help to us from the standpoint of if they saw a ship like a freighter or a Navy ship or anything
Here you go.
coming into the area, they would immediately inform us. And of course, was a little difficult with communications. A lot of drawing in the snow. But they were a help from that standpoint. Anything that was unusual or a weather condition that they knew was going to change and how, but otherwise they weren't much help, because the only thing they could provide for food was any fish that they caught that we didn't catch, and of course that was good. We were glad to have that,
Right.
but there was no such thing as anything growing up there, you know.
Right.
I
have a picture here, Max,
Yeah.
and it's the picture of the polar bear.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Would you like to tell us about that story?
yeah, I can.
All right.
One day, one of my friends was in one of these Quonset huts working on one of our transmitters. And while he was in there, this polar bear showed up, and he was pawing at the door and trying to get in because he could hear some noise in there, and probably wanted to try and find some food or anything, that he felt he could need, and I was concerned that he might get in there and injure my friend. So I yelled into him, and I said, "Hey, Johnny, go grab your rifle and be prepared because there's a polar bear out here trying to get in, and he might go after you." And he said, "I'm not worried about that. I've got 3 lions in here with me." Anyway, it got to the point where it looked like he might actually be able to get inside. And so, of course, I had my .30-06 with me, and I decided to shoot him. I really didn't want to, but, you do what you feel you have to at the time.
Right.
And so that's where he came from.
And what did you do with the bear afterwards?
Well, actually, we cooked him, or our cooks did, and we ate the polar bear.
And how was that?
Well, it tasted like any venison does. Like the bear that we go out, not necessarily me, but some people go out to hunt.
Right. Well, you met your protein needs that day.
Yeah.
So things were getting a little tough out there. There weren't many of you left, and you didn't have much food.
Yeah.
So what did you try to do to reach people, to find out when you were getting out of there?
Oh, well, we couldn't use our radio because they wouldn't allow us to. Our commanding officer at the time was going to call to try to get some food and supplies sent to us, and they really raised hell with him about that. They said, your transmitter's there for only one purpose, and that's all you're supposed to use it for, to contact us on the business that you're there to do, nothing else. And that's the response he got.
So what did you do?
Well, once in a while we would take this little boat that we had and go from outpost to outpost where the Army had their people, and they would give us things.
It was quite a ways away, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, like probably the longest distance that we would go would be 10 miles or so.
It wasn't long.
It was pretty rough.
Yes.
The living conditions were, because of the weather too.
Yes, and you were there so long.
Yeah.
So how did you eventually get off the island?
What about the German Christmas?
Well, it got to the point where myself and the other 10 guys were demoralizing the men who had come up there recently, and the old man, as we called him, the commanding officer, he got us together one day, and he said, "I want to tell you guys something. I'm getting tired of putting up with you, and the next thing that floats, that gets within 2 miles from here you guys are going to be on, and how you go from there to home is going to be you a problem. And
Explain why. you
so
were
that
doing
that was the situation that we had at that time. And
Why were they demoralizing?
What were you doing to demoralize? It sounds like some new
Well,
people came.
for example, we had all our stuff, our gear and everything packed, and we brought it down and put it in this one little building that we were using for recreation, playing cards and so forth. And just the fact that they saw this, left a bad taste in their mouth. And you can understand how they felt.
Mm-hmm.
They could see what things were going to come to for themselves.
Right.
And we weren't doing anything as far as conversation or that sort of thing. We were just going about what we thought we had to do, and just our living conditions and so forth weren't very pleasant for these younger people to cope with.
So they sent some replacements.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many of you were left to get out?
Well, we got down to what I called the unlucky 6.
Okay.
There were 6 of us.
So what was your first step in departing from the island?
A small Army ship. The Army had more ships up there in the above the Arctic Circle than we did, believe it or not. And one of their smaller craft came by one day, and so our commanding officer decided to live up to his statement he had made earlier about getting rid of us, and so he made a deal with the colonel, with the Army there, to give us a ride to the Bluey West 1 is what we called that main station on Greenland.
Right.
And don't ask me why, but that's what we called it. And so he put us aboard with all our gear to that little Army craft, and they took us to Bluey West 1.
So you didn't have
To
any
find-
orders, were you?
to wait for another floating vehicle that they could put us on.
So you were just out drifting. You didn't have orders to go anyplace.
No, we didn't. We didn't have any orders at all, and we didn't have any replacements either, which would have been the normal course of events. And that was another thing that was demoralizing to the younger guys.
Right.
They saw what the situation was going to be for them too.
Right. So how long were you at Bluey West 1, the airfield?
We were there about, I would say, 2 months.
And what did you do there? Did you have any jobs that you did?
Well, yes, we were doing whatever was necessary that fit our capabilities, I repaired a couple of vehicles and a couple of trucks, and we maintained a couple of the Quonset huts, put new windows in, and one of the guys had become pretty savvy with those heating things that we were using, and he put some new carburetors on them, and so whatever we could do, we did, and that was it. And that held true
Excuse me.
all throughout the time we were up there.
There are some, apparently he captured some Germans while he was there. Is
Okay.
that something we can go back to?
Okay. Do you remember, Max, when you were still in Greenland, did you capture some Germans?
The Germans?
Yes, did you capture them
Well, yeah, the prisoners there.
in Greenland?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, there's not much to tell. I mean, we just had normal conversations.
No, before, how you captured
You
them.
saw them
When you
arrive
saw them.
on the boat.
Did you see the Germans arrive by boat? Did you capture them when you?
Yeah, we did.
Tell us about that.
About 8 of us were on one of our little journeys around between the outposts looking for food. And we came around this big iceberg and saw a little ship, about like a good-sized yacht, and some men climbing off it and unloading stuff from that ship. So we figured they were planning on, building some kind of an outpost, and so we decided to try and capture them and report it to the main base. And all we had 5 of us each had a .45 revolver, and that's what the Army guys had left us. And they also left a couple of machine guns, which were not part of this operation. So it was fairly easy to capture them. And
Did anyone get injured? Wow. Did
Pardon?
anybody get injured? Did any of the?
no,
No one.
no. And so when we got back to the transmitter, we contacted Bluey West 1 and told them we had these guys, and they said, take them back to your base and keep them there until you hear from us. We'll be sending somebody out to pick them up. And so that's what we did. And like I say, it was very easy because they didn't have even as much as our 45s.
So it sounds like they cooperated,
And
and you were able to speak to them.
yeah,
That was very valuable.
yeah, it was.
Yeah. All right, so you were on Bluey West 1, and you were trying to get out of there to work your way back to Boston.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, let me see.
You were getting kind of desperate, weren't you? you were all getting kind of desperate and said, someone's got to
Oh, of
help us.
course.
Yeah.
Of
So
course.
what did you do? Did you decide to go someplace and say, that's it, we need help?
Well, we decided to, like I say, we had all our gear packed and everything, and we decided, like the old man had said, the next thing that floats, we would be on, and we decided, regardless of whether he wanted us to or not, that's what we were going to do. And this little frigate, which is a very small boat, happened to come, and we decided to take that over and go as far as we could in the southeast direction. And so that's what we did. And we got as far as Newfoundland. Eventually to St. John's, and we were able to stay over there and get a decent night's rest and have some decent food to eat in their little mess hall. And then we took that ship and headed southeast, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
We got to St. John's, Newfoundland, and spent a couple of nights there. Then New Brunswick, where there was an army base,
Mm-hmm.
and that was comfortable. And the CO was very very nice to us and was trying to help us as much as he could. And I asked him to give us some documents that we could utilize, because I knew wherever we went that was partly civilized, they would be looking for documentation, what we were doing there and where we were from and where we were going and all the rest. So he provided us with that. And some ammunition for this 30 caliber machine gun that the Army had left us. So we put that on our ship and took off from there.
It must have raised your morale that someone was helping you out, and
Yeah.
you got a new lease on life.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a big thing.
And so then where did you go?
Well, then he had gotten us some train tickets. There was a little narrow gauge train that went down from St. John's and Argentia down the coast. We decided to go to Argentia, which was an army base there in Newfoundland. And we stayed there for a couple of weeks. And the commander there gave us some tickets on this little narrow gauge railroad that went all the way into Maine. we got aboard that, and we were sitting there playing cards and talking. And all of a sudden we were knocked out of our seats on the floor. And we got up to see what had happened. Got off the train and we found that the locomotive on our train had run into the back of another train that had been accidentally parked on that same track. So here we were in a train wreck in the middle of nowhere in Maine.
Yes. And you thought you were on your way to Boston.
Yeah. One of the local people there said he knew somebody who had a telephone about 10 miles away, and he volunteered to hike through that horrible weather and that snow to there to call the railroad about getting a relief train.
Were any of the unlucky 6 hurt? Were you
Yeah.
injured?
Yeah, we were all there.
But you weren't hurt. You weren't injured
They,
in the train wreck. You didn't get hurt. Some people got hurt on that train.
oh,
But did your group
Yeah, people
manage
got
to
hurt.
escape?
but there were 6 of us military, besides my guys. There was an army captain and another 2 military. And of course, we took over to try and do what we could to help the injured people, because some of those injured were badly injured, which is typical for a train wreck. It's steel on steel, you know. And so we did what we could for that. And this relief train finally arrived from someplace down there in Maine. But we had hoped and asked for a doctor, because none of us had any medical training, of course. And there was no doctor. There was one nurse who didn't know very much either.
Well, Max, after a very difficult trip back from Greenland, including several transfers and a train wreck, you made it back to Boston, and it was probably when you were about 26 years old, as I'm looking back and doing my math, and you got to Boston, and you got let off at the train station. Then what did you do?
We didn't get a very hearty greeting there. They said we were causing a disturbance on the train, which was a lot of baloney, but
So you got into the city, and
it didn't make us feel very good.
who didn't?
I said that didn't.
No, who was saying that about you? Who complained?
I don't know, but somebody to the army captain, because he came and talked to us about that.
That was when they took the linen to help the injured people.
Oh, this is still during the train wreck, during the time of the train wreck, and you were helping?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and we had gotten, of course we were looking for something to drink after that experience.
That must have been very upsetting to see all that.
And and I guess somebody had a bottle or something and gave us something to drink. But I don't believe we caused any problem.
Okay. Well, you made it back to Boston, and how did you get home?
Well, I just called my in-laws on the telephone.
Were they surprised to hear from you?
Oh, sure.
Because
and
you
somebody
couldn't
came over and picked me up.
you couldn't really communicate very well while you were gone. During the time you were away, you hadn't seen people and you couldn't talk to anyone. So they
No.
must have been surprised.
Yeah.
What kind of orders did you get after you got back to Boston?
I was transferred down to Cape Cod.
That sounds a lot nicer than Greenland.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very nice.
And what rank were you by then, Max?
Oh, I was second class.
And you were still carpenter?
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember we were talking about your wages way back, and you had made about $39 a month at one point,
Yeah.
and so you were first class or second class, and how much did you make after that?
When I was first class, I was making 60.
Uh-huh. That's quite a pay raise.
Yeah.
So you went to Massachusetts. Were you able to bring your wife?
Yeah.
Okay. And how long were you there?
And Cape Cod,
Yeah.
we were there all summer.
And what were your duties there? What kind of job did you have?
Well, the prisoners that were.
Well, I got a job over at the tailor's shop.
But this was on Cape Cod?
Yeah.
But you were in the Navy, is your primary job, right?
Yeah.
And what did you do there for the Navy?
Well, I was doing the same thing I had before, which was making alterations on uniforms and putting insignias on where they belonged and that sort of thing.
Did you have anything to do with the prisoners there on Cape Cod? German prisoners?
Yeah.
Dad, when you're on Cape Cod,
Yeah.
who did you use for labor to help build the buildings and do all the work the Navy needed done?
Well, that's where we used the prisoners.
And did you supervise them?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I needed some help with what I was doing,
Okay.
I would call an army sergeant and tell him I needed about 20 men. And he would ask me where I wanted them, and I'd tell him, and he would send them over with a corporal in charge. And I would tell them what I needed done. And while they were working, if there was any problem with understanding on one side or the other, I could handle that with my knowledge of German.
And how were they like to work with? Did they follow your instructions well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't have any problem like that.
Good. Now, while you were living in Massachusetts, your first child was born. Your daughter was born.
Oh, yeah.
And what year was that about?
That was 1946.
Okay. And that must have been Karen because she's your oldest.
Yeah, that was in November of 1946.
Very good. Okay. So you were there for 2 years, so she grew up on Cape Cod with you and your wife.
Yeah.
And when your time was up, what did you do after that? Did you go back to Boston?
Yeah.
What'd you do there?
Well, I went back to what I was doing before, and that was mostly remodeling.
Now, you were off of active duty at that time? You completed active duty?
Well, I was still on active duty, but I didn't have much to do as far as the Navy was concerned.
So you were able to take a side job?
Yeah.
Okay. And how long did you do that?
Oh, I would say until Linda was born.
No. No.
So you did that for a while, and then did you join the reserves?
Well, when they called me back to active duty, I just signed over for another 6 months.
And you were still in Boston then?
Yes.
Okay. So you stayed there in the reserves and you worked,
Yeah.
doing remodeling. Okay. After that, where did you move?
I decided to come back to California,
Whereabouts was that?
and we went to Pasadena.
Okay. So what did you do for work there? Were you in the reserves still?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I worked there in the family business.
I understand it was quite a business by then.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, we had to begin with, we had a very good reputation from 1926 on. And of course that helped, especially in getting jobs. And
Did you go back to the theater? Were you working in the theater also, Dad?
yes, every place I went, I made contacts with the little theaters. In fact, I had this side business that provided lighting and scenery and direction for theatrical productions.
So you did that
And
along with your regular job.
yeah,
So did you act?
at certain times I did, yes.
Did you meet up with any famous people?
Yeah, I did.
Can you recall any of the names?
Well, when you say famous, I worked with some people who were well known in the theatrical industry, but not necessarily movie stars.
Later to become movie stars.
And television.
And
So they were
television.
just starting out in their career.
Well, I went to school with Donna Reed, for example, and Alexis Smith.
Big names.
and
Esther Williams.
several of the guys.
So that must have been very rewarding for you to be able to
Oh yeah.
do that, plus the family business, and you were in the reserves.
Yeah, and like I say, I was always involved with little theater groups,
Hmm.
and we always had someone with, quite a reputation
Mhm.
in those. I was trying to think of a couple of the shows I did in New York.
Well, that may come to you in a few minutes. So you continued to be in the reserves,
Yeah,
and with that comes the probability of being called to active duty.
yeah,
And were you called back?
yeah.
About when was that?
Well, that would have been in the,
You were in the Korean War?
yeah,
Okay, probably in the 50s.
yeah.
And what do you think your rank was by then? You were carpenter first class, and then you moved up.
Yeah, I became a chief.
CPO.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you got called back, where did you go?
Let me see.
Did you go to San Diego?
Yes.
Okay. And then where did they send you?
Yeah, in fact, I came right to this base. This was my first duty station after they called me back.
Okay.
Right here.
No place like home.
I was stationed here part of the time, and part of the time I was stationed in Korea at our base there at Nampang,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I was flying out of every day.
Do you ever remember, Max, getting injured when the ship you were on was hit by a torpedo?
Oh yeah,
Tell us about that.
well, yes, that the Rowena, R-O-W-E-E-N-A, was a small Navy tanker. And I spent time on that mostly in the North Atlantic. And we were chasing and being chased by submarines.
Mhm.
And one day I was up on what we used to call the poop deck, but it was the first little deck up forward, the front of the ship. And I was up there talking with the chief bosun mate and the commander of the ship, the captain of the ship. And we got a warning all of a sudden about a submarine in the area. And that meant everybody went to their battle stations. And I asked the chief bosun if there was anything special he wanted me to do. And he said, no, just go to your battle station I'll be in touch with you later. And so I was climbing down. There was 3 sets of ladders that I had to climb down to get down to the main deck. I was climbing down them, and all of a sudden I got knocked off one of those ladders and fell down on the deck and injured my back. Apparently it damaged some of the vertebrae. And
Because you were torpedoed.
so that was that.
What caused the accident?
You mean me falling?
Yeah.
The concussion of the ship being hit,
What hit it?
a torpedo.
So what happened? Were you laid out on your back? Were you
Yeah.
in bed for a while?
Yeah.
What did they do for you?
Nothing.
How soon was it?
There isn't anything you can do.
How soon was it before you could get up and around again?
Well, it didn't take me long. A few hours.
Oh my goodness.
Uh,
Were there a lot of injuries that day?
well, I don't know what a lot would be. There were probably no more than 6.
There were 3 fatalities.
And did anyone die?
No.
So that was quite an experience for you.
Yeah.
Do you still have trouble with your back?
Not right now, but I did for many years.
And you were in construction too.
Yeah,
Yeah, that must have been hard.
was.
Yeah. You know, Max, you were very involved in community activities after you retired from the military and lived in this area. You were in the involved with Memorial Day ceremony, the Veterans Day, and Pearl Harbor Day event. That was a big one that you liked to be involved with.
Created it.
And what?
You created the Pearl Harbor Day event.
All of them. All of them.
Oh, yeah.
And I was reading something about everything that you did, and you thought that that was a very important cause to keep it going.
Yeah.
And you had to miss the last one because you got sick. But just before that, you had said something very important when you opened up that ceremony. And I want to quote you, okay?
Okay.
It says, "History repeats itself, and that's why I wanted to hold on to this program as long as possible so we don't forget and we don't repeat it." I thought that was very, very strong, patriotic language.
Well, that's, I've always felt about that way. And that's why I devoted as much time as I did to the Pearl Harbor event, which of course later on I included 9/11, which is the way it is now. I call that attack on America.
It sure was. Well,
Yeah.
you certainly gave so much to your community. We have several pictures and awards that we're going to be showing on this DVD that where the community shows its appreciation for everything you've done. You're a true veteran, and I want to thank you very much, Max, for your service to our country.
Well, thank you for the thank you. But I found a long time ago in life, mostly we do what has to be done. There are things in front of us that need to be taken care of, and many times we have special qualifications that mean we're the one at that time who can handle it. So you just go about your business and do what you can do. That's been my attitude most of my life, and I still feel that way.
Well, your country and your family and community are very lucky recipients.
Well, you know, my country's always been there for me, and I've always appreciated that. And of course, I don't have to say anything about my family. I'm very fortunate to have one of the greatest, I think, that ever has been. Each one of them individually and as a group has meant so much to me and given me so much. It's really made my life complete. And that holds true for friends, too. That's another way I'm very fortunate. I have so many really close and good friends. And I know friendship is something that works both ways. But you're also very lucky if you have the right kind of people as your friend. And I can certainly say that I always have had. I don't know what I would have done without them.
From what I can remember as a child growing up, asking my dad questions about, every kid wants to know what your dad do in the war. Of course, my dad was in 2 wars. But one of the memorable things, I remember him spending time on an island in Greenland for a couple of years. They were doing sort of espionage work. They were receiving German radio messages, and then they would screw the messages up and send them on to the Germans, things like that. Very top secret. No one was allowed to know where they were. They kind of forgot there during the war. He had a lot of interesting experiences, as you heard him speak of earlier, having to hitchhike back from Greenland all the way back to where he was stationed in Boston. While he was stationed in Greenland, a lot of interesting things happened. Like he and 5 others captured some Germans that were planning to come on the island and set up some type of outpost. And all they had were their sidearms, their 45 revolvers, and they managed to capture these Germans and detain them and kept them there at their quats and huts until they could be transferred onto the main base. While there, I guess they ran out of food, and it was really hard to get supplies up there. So at times they resorted to eating whatever fish they could get from the Eskimos, and also they shot a polar bear. One of the polar bears was trying to break into one of the huts after one of the men, and my father had to shoot the polar bear, although he waited to the last minute because he really didn't want to shoot the bear. But They ended up eating the bear because that was a good source of food. And at times they got down to so little rations that they even, just for get protein, had to eat bugs and other sorts of things. So his time in Greenland was quite interesting. But other times during World War II, he was on a tanker in the North Atlantic, and that tanker was hit by a torpedo, at which time my father was up near one of the top decks, went up there to talk to the captain and the bosun's mate, because there had been German submarines spotted in the area. And they were discussing that, and they were told to get to their battle stations, and as on his way down one of the ladders, a torpedo hit the tanker and knocked him from one deck down to the other on his back, and that's where he got his injury, why he's a disabled American veteran. Fortunately, the torpedo was somewhat of a dud. From what I understand, 3 sailors were killed, and it only involved the front compartments, and they sealed them off and were able to save the ship from sinking. And he had a fairly interesting career in the service. He was in reserves after World War II, and then was living in San Diego, where he was activated again and had to go to Korea, which he spent time until about 1952 or 1953 in Korea. And then he returned back to civilian life after that and was involved in contracting, and did a lot of military construction, and built Nike Sykes and all kinds of things like that. And later on, when I was older and working with him, we worked on a lot of top secret military installations, islands out in the Pacific and such like that were used during the Cold War to, spy on the Soviets and on their subs and other such things. A lot of interesting things. We built space launch complexes that were used to launch spy satellites and such. All these were very top secret projects. And so even after he was in the military, he kept on with this working with the military in top secret and very secure areas. We built missile assembly and tear down facilities, avionic buildings, spy towers, and other such things. Worked out in islands like San Nicolas Islands and others for numerous years. And that's kind of what he specialized in as a military contractor, construction specialist for many years, into about the 1980s.
My father comes from a very patriotic family and one who helps people whenever they can. And as my father continued through his career and such, he joined the Disabled American Veterans and many other community organizations. He was the commander of the Disabled American Veterans for at least 16 years, and then continued in his 90s as commander and then vice commander. Some of the things he did would be to organize events such as Veterans Day, and he created Pearl Harbor Day so that people would not forget. He would invite congressmen, the head of the Navy commanders of the base. He would have flyovers of the old airplanes and the new jets. He'd have music from that era and World War II veterans speak at these events. He went all out and tried to involve the community in that. In addition, he would go down to hospitals in San Diego, all over California, and organize a dinner for them, a barbecue. He would go shopping for the food himself, put it all together. We're talking about 92, 93 years old. One time he was down there and he was concerned that a lot of the
veterans. These are seriously wounded veterans that are confined to hospitals. Some of them might have diabetes, and he was afraid they always served cake and ice cream in addition to a wonderful meal. So he went all over town, in a town he didn't know, looking for sugar-free ice cream just to take care of those. That's how he was, helping people out. The Pearl Harbor Day after 9/11 turned into Attack on America, which he felt very strong about, making sure that people did not forget this. And so he worked very hard, as I had mentioned, with these events. And he's been recognized by Congress, by the White House, by the state legislature, by the Senate, and he would have congressmen and senators come and speak, which they didn't mind doing because he knew the person he was and they wanted to support him. Another one of the stories, he was going to the National Convention for the veterans, and he had plans to go with some of the Vietnam veterans. They were going to drive him over. At this time, I think it was in Las Vegas, Nevada. Well, it turned out that the other people riding with him were too sick to go, so without telling any of us in the family, and we're talking 93 years old, he left in the middle of the night, drove through the desert, 80, 90 miles an hour, and got there on time, and spent the few days there representing his people out here in California. This is the kind of dedication that he had, and stamina and energy he had. He would work probably 17 hours a day on efforts towards the veterans. He would get phone calls every day, people who needed help, and he would direct them. The County Board of Supervisors in Ventura asked him to join the Agency on Aging, and so he did what he could for the people of the community, and a lot of the work he did himself and was still driving. He also started a column in the newspaper when he was about 94, and it was dedicated to the veterans and would provide information nationwide of ways that they could either get help or events that were going on, this sort of thing. And he was still writing it when he took ill this past year. And the year before, he was at the VA hospital for something, and he was still in ICU, and he was writing the column. Quite a guy.
I'm Richard Vanderwick. I'm the youngest of the family of four. And I remember I might have been in his office where he did always workforce contracting. There might have been a photograph that showed the first image I had of him being in Greenland. And there was a crew of guys, and there was a bulldozer. And there was snow, and Max had on a big beard. These guys their faces had this look that was, it kept an image in my mind of how it must have been out there. On that, we would open our closet in our bedroom, and there would be backpacks, military clothing, and us kids, my brother and I, and Marky and Butch and Timmy, the neighborhood kids, we would go and we'd put our stuff on and we'd go play Army. And that was something that was interesting because that photo kind of inspired us on the, how it must have been. You know, just by the look on all their faces in that photo, it was really interesting. We got inspired to play Army and run around the backyard. something I remember. And also the 49 panel pickup Chevrolet that was in the family for a while. That was kind of a neat thing. It was all olive drab and left an image on my life.